when you said cheesy, and he's like, "I trust you," and every time he's like, "Go ahead, I trust her." I think, what does trust got to do with hitting this handcuffs with an axe? Trust has nothing
she
to do with
closes
this.
her eyes and swings that
Yes.
axe and gets it first time, and I'm like, nope, that would have either gone straight through his arm or in his head.
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be.
Hello and welcome. My name is James Marsh. I'm joined by my friend Steve Hackman, and this episode is part of our Every Best Picture series, and we're talking Titanic.
Hey, you know how this works. Subscriptions really help. And if you haven't already subscribed, it'd be a great favor to us if you did so. While you're there, press that little subscribe button. There's a little bell next to it. If you ding that, you'll be notified every time we upload a new video. And just as a reminder, we do spoilers here at Deep Dives, so you have been warned. James, just to let you know, my drink of choice today is going to be a little sipping tequila, little Jose Cuervo.
Without an iceberg in there as well. You know, I thought that could have been on brand.
Just straight, just a little bit,
You're a monster, but okay.
Yeah.
So yes, we are talking James Cameron's Titanic. This is not the next movie in our series. However, it is the 25th anniversary of the original release of the 11-time Oscar-winning movie starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet. So I thought, why not? Since I've just had the opportunity to see the film beautifully restored in IMAX 3D, why not talk about it now?
Hey, I'm doing this slightly under duress, James, because I have a bit of OCD in some certain areas, and I had envisioned when we had accomplished all of our Every Best Picture, it would be a nice little organized row from 1929 Wings all the way up to whenever we finish it, whatever the best picture is, Banshees of Inisherin.
Oh, James.
Oh, I'm putting a little foreshadowing, a little guessing there. But yeah, it is the 25th anniversary of a much beloved film, and one that I think, I'm just going to come out and say it. We usually say this at the end, but it's coming out now, has really stood the test of time. Although I didn't watch the 4K restoration with you on IMAX, I have seen this film no less than a dozen times, and I have viewed it within the last year as a family. And I love this film. It still holds up. It's enjoyable. It's riveting. It keeps you right from the beginning to the end. And if anything, it reminds me the kind of films that James Cameron is capable of making, because I'm not a huge Avatar fan.
Yeah, I mean, I came to this movie back in 1998. It was early in 98 when it opened in the UK. And I, at the time, was a huge James Cameron fan. I was a 20-year-old film student at university, and he was one of my favorite filmmakers. You know, I saw Terminator 2 at a very impressionable age, and I'd already a big fan of Aliens, and that just kept going. So this, for me, was felt like a sort of slight change of pace. And I think people forget that in the run-up to the release of Titanic, everybody wrote it off. Everybody said this is going to be an absolute disaster. It had almost bankrupted Paramount and Fox, who had...
It was going to be James Cameron's Waterworld, is what it was. I remember it was going to be.
Yeah, and people were saying things like, "Oh, you don't make films on water because they all mess up." And then obviously, it comes out and it's an absolute behemoth. What I remember, my attitude at the time was that I did really like it, but as a 20-year-old guy I remember going to see it with my 3 housemates, other 20-year-old guys, none of whom were film students. I was the only film student. And so I took them somewhat under duress. It was kind of like, come on, it's going to be the biggest movie of the year. We drove out to the cinema and we all watched it. And I think by and large, we all appreciated, it's good, but there was definitely some grumbling in the car on the way home.
Right.
But I remember at the time saying, if you start halfway through and leave 15 minutes before the end, it's this really sort of brilliantly, tightly constructed disaster movie. Now, obviously, it wouldn't have become, I think, the behemoth that it did if it had just been that movie. I think what sold it and what continues to sell it again and again and again, year after year, is the love story. As straight down the line, as simplistic, as black and white, good versus evil, rich versus poor, as it is, that only serves to make it more accessible. And I agree with you that over time, those are the elements that continue to work and that endure
Mhm.
regardless of any innovations in technology or CGI that have improved since then.
Right. And, obviously there's some CGI in this. And even though it's 25 years old, the CGI by and large holds up. And I think one of the reasons it does is Cameron was very minimalist in its use. He really created a lot of sets with real water rushing into real places. And so there's this tactile feel in the film that I remember even when I recently rewatched it, where as I have bemoaned in reviews past, that sometimes CGI for me gets so disconnected from reality that I feel like I'm watching a cartoon and I have no emotional investment in it anymore because this is not real anymore. It's a cartoon. Whereas in Cameron's Titanic, I never get that feeling for one moment. I am on this boat with Jack and Rose, Jack and Rose.
Yeah.
And I am trying to stay alive along with everyone else on this ship.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I just watched this. As I said, it was just re-released last week, and just last night I went and watched Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantum Mania, and it could not be more different. That movie seems to take place almost entirely within some great big green screen CGI snow globe,
right?
Ostensibly, where there is no concept of reality. There are no solid objects to interact with at all. Whereas always, every step of the way on Titanic, there is real furniture, and I remember Cameron being obsessed with getting the cutlery and the crockery right and period specific, and the chairs in the dining rooms or the ballrooms and everything being spot on. All of that feels right. When characters fall off the end of the ship and smack and hit propellers, those are there. So even though the entire ship is not there and it's not in the ocean, enough of those elements do exist and are 3D creations, tactile creations, like you said, that characters can bump into, fall over, climb over, what have you, that it really does add to it. There are a couple of money shots, if you like, of aerial shots as the entire ship goes past the camera, where when blown up on the big IMAX screen, restored so that it's pristine to see, you can kind of spot the little sort of Lego men type characters walking around on the deck, but it doesn't detract in any way. You don't sort of get taken out of the movie. You don't go, oh, it looks so fake. It just feels quaint in a way, in the same way that you look at sort of practical effects in an original Star Wars movie. You look at the puppetry involved there and you're like, that's a puppet, that's not a monster, that's not an alien. But it doesn't pull you out of the movie. You don't say, oh, how can I possibly believe this? And I think it's possible now to look at moments like that in this film with that kind of sort of almost nostalgic feel for simpler times, rather than it take you out of the movie like bad CG can so often do.
Yeah. Speaking of simpler times, I saw this actually with one of my Japanese students, and I remember at the time we went to Shatin Cinema, and it was so massive. Her family wasn't going to take her to see it. A young Japanese girl, she's about 15 years old. When I think of it now as a professional educator, I'm sure there's some child protection issues at play there, but it was 1997. And our families had gotten to know each other a little bit. And so the mom said, oh, would you take her as an English assignment to go see Titanic? So I saw Titanic for the first time with a 15-year-old Japanese girl and getting her perspective of this. And for her, it was just, I'll never forget, just wide-eyed, the romance, the grandeur, the story. It was really overwhelming for her. I just remembered, this is really cool. A really big boat is sinking, and I think we appreciated it on different levels. But
for sure.
that was my first viewing of it.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that I really did. I kind of approached this new release of it slightly trepidatiously, because I think over time I haven't really revisited it. I've probably seen it 2 or 3 times in its entirety. And I think you know, I think just the burden of its success and reputation, the fact that it gets wheeled out on Valentine's Day, particularly,
Yeah.
as opposed to like the anniversary of when it sank or anything like that. It seems to be a sort of a Valentine's Day movie now these days. And I think that's when they re-released it here, or close enough to Valentine's Day, that it could be seen as such. And I hadn't gone back to it because I remember the reputation of, oh, the dialogue was really cheesy, and you know, how archetypal all the characters are, how two-dimensional they all are.
Yeah.
And going back and watching it, I was like, okay, it's a 4K restoration. It's an opportunity to finally see it in IMAX. It was 3D as well, although I understand the 3D conversion that was actually done 10 years ago for the 15th anniversary. But I went in, and those were the things that I really, really appreciated and what really resonated with me more this time, is that you just sit back and you realize this movie just works so well. It is so slick. It's so complex in its in the way that it's made, the way that it's shot, and the way that it's edited.
Yes.
It's a real master, you know, bravura performance of you know, a filmmaker at work. Yet the archetypal sort of yin yang of all the characters and the oppositions of being in first class or in steerage and all of that only service the story more and more and more. And I just sat back and I was complete. And this is like, you know, only a couple of weeks after seeing Avatar: Way of Water, which I thought was a kind of an unwieldy mess. Sitting back and watching this and going, this really is a master craftsman firing on all cylinders.
You know, absolutely, because I think his usage of a modern day story with Bill Paxton really connects it to a modern audience. This is not just an ancient story of a ship that went down 100 years ago that we're detached from. Cameron just brilliantly gives us this connection point with the Rose character being 110 years old in the future, and, you know, obviously her telling this story. So then it really comes alive, and that leads me into, unlike Avatar, which is a little hit or miss with its cast. It does have Sigourney Weaver. It does have Steve. Help me out, Steve, the guy who plays the
Stephen
Nemesis.
Lang.
Stephen Lang. Thank you. It has Sigourney Weaver, has Stephen Lang, who I really enjoy. But by and large, some of the acting is spotty in Avatar, whereas in Titanic, it is rock solid. You have a young Kate Winslet, you have a young Leonardo DiCaprio. That's a given. But Billy Zane, Victor Garber plays one of the most interesting characters. He's just like this force of nature, this steady plumb line through the whole film. You've got Bernard Hill as the captain.
Kathy Bates,
just
the unsinkable Molly Brown.
Yes, thank you. It is just such a well-rounded cast with colorful characters. I mean, even down to the musicians who are playing outside, you know, and they're like, you know, gentlemen, it's been an honor playing with you this evening. It's just everything in this cast-wise was near perfect. I don't know if you could cast this film better than it was.
And I think why that works so well, or why it's so important that he went to that degree, and why there is kind of an hour and a half of movie before it hits the iceberg. And this is something that I was really appreciating for the first time on this viewing, is that by the time everybody is in trouble, you know about 30 different characters on that boat. It's not just, you know, Rose and Jack and Billy Zane running around with a gun. You know 3 or 4 people, if only by sight, but you know who they are and what they represent and where they came from and what they stand to lose. You know 3 or 4 people in steerage. You know a dozen or so people in first class. You know the owner of the boat and the designer of the boat. You know that the Lord Guggenheim or whatever is on there. You know some of the crew as well. And you see all of them process this, you know, life or death situation in real time from their own unique perspective, and it really just helps you to understand and get a complete picture of, you know, this incredible true life disaster. And I thought that's the real genius. So, you know, when it goes on to win Best Picture, I mean, you can understand it winning like Best Editing and Best Production Design and Best Cinematography, but it wins Best Picture because of just the storytelling experience of it all is so well rounded. is so comprehensive. And you brought up the sort of the bookend, the Bill Paxton kind of wraparound story set in the present day, and that made me think of a couple of things. Firstly, that's incredibly quaint now because that's 25 years old. So you watch those sequences with the submersibles and the remote controlled cameras and the computer technology that renders all of that now is so antiquated,
right,
that it kind of almost fits in more with the rest of the movie. It's like it's all old, and it's all quite sort of charming and sweet in its simplicity.
I mean,
The other thing is
even Bill Paxton, God rest his soul.
God rest his soul, absolutely, and his hoop earrings, which is a bad choice, but hey, it makes him look like a pirate. But also that whole storyline feels almost like a Michael Crichton story. And you've got to remember that when this movie came out, Michael Crichton was at the height of his powers and the height of his success. Jurassic Park had only come out like 4 years earlier. And currently Hollywood was like grabbing as many Michael Crichton novels as they could and commissioning adaptations of ones that hadn't even been written yet. And so many of those are essentially thrillers, but wrapped around a piece of new technology, an idea, a new technological idea. And I sat here going, this could very well be a Michael Crichton story.
Absolutely.
just in the way that it told its story, because he's done historical ones. He did like the first great train robbery and Eaters of the Dead that became the 13th Warrior and things like that. And he did Timeline. He is not averse to using those technological advances to look backwards into history and with new eyes, if you like. It was just this observation I made. I don't think there's a larger point really, but it was just like that those two, that it was almost like Cameron and Crichton were at were beautifully aligned in I think the structure and the storytelling approach of Titanic.
Well said. And we can say that 25 years later, James Cameron has done that experiment to prove that Jack could not have joined Rose on the plank of wood floating at the end, which has just been the source of contention for many Titanic fans for 25 years. Why didn't she just pull him up on the door or the wood frame she was on with her? And apparently it would have,
it would have worked. And the number of people online who have made videos about it and have done experiments. And apparently James Cameron has since conceded that, he could probably fit on there. Although at the time, I remember him being quite adamant about it. It's like, no, don't be ridiculous. I don't know why people are even talking about this. You're missing the point.
Yeah. Well, I think they've done an experiment now. I think they've reenacted it. And supposedly, I thought maybe I'm getting it wrong. I thought it wouldn't work and it justified James Cameron. But you're saying, no, he's saying, no.
I think everybody has kind of conceded that there was plenty of room on there, and that he would have probably been fine.
Yeah,
but
the thing that always bothered me was when Rose dies and she goes and she's back on the Titanic and she's with the people that she went down with, and Jack's there. I'm always thinking, what? The granddaughter is with her. She's been saying she got married later and lived like 50, 60 years with this other guy. So you're telling me in the afterlife, the guy that she was wed and had her family with,
it's always been Jack.
It's just, that always bothered me. I'm like, come on, this was a fling. This was a flash in the pan.
Oh yeah. They've known each other for like, 2 days.
48 hours. 2 days, yeah.
But that's true love. That's what makes it so tragic. That's why Japanese teenage girls are in floods of tears, not just because they're sitting next to you, but because they're watching tragic, unrealized, love play out before them.
Well, James, I think we've already shown our hand here, in that this is a film that definitely stands the test of time. This is, even though it's 25 years old, compared with what we have been reviewing since we began Every Best Picture, I think for me, I can easily say this is a film that has stood the test of time. It has held up. I never for a minute think, wow, this thing worked in 1997, but for a 2023 audience, it's lost its luster. That's just not the case here.
No, absolutely not. I mean, and I think that some of the grumblings that happened at the time have disappeared. You know, yes, we've just joked about one or two sort of lingering
Mm.
gripes with the movie, but I think for example, I mean, you look at what it was up against at the Oscars that year, and it was nominated for Best Picture alongside L.A. Confidential in
Well,
particular, which was the movie that I think a lot of, you know, the critics on the day were pointing at and going, that's the better movie. And you know, and I loved that movie too, and I
yeah,
think I would have appreciated that. Good Will Hunting was another one.
yeah.
But I think would we be having these conversations about either of those movies with the same passion and fervor today? I don't think so. I mean, there's something very old timey, very classic Hollywood
Yeah.
about Titanic. It's one of those old style Oscar winning movies. You know, you used to
Mhm.
be able to spot them, something like Gone with the Wind, something like Lawrence of Arabia, you know, just these huge sweeping epics. That were getting a little bit of traction back again in the 90s. Braveheart, English
Mhm.
Patient, you know, they were kind of on a run of these again, and then so Titanic seemed unsinkable
Right.
in that, and I think looking back 25 years later, it absolutely was the right decision.
Mhm.
It is the movie of that year, of that era, that, you know, unlike something like LA Confidential, as good as that is.
It's interesting how hindsight has a way of changing things over the years. I was one of those people who I was adamant that LA Confidential was my favorite film of that year. I would rewatch it regularly, but as I look back now, and like you said, I still love that movie. I wonder why it has failed to capture some of the zeitgeist that I think it's more deserving of. I'm not even saying comparing it to Titanic for Best Picture,
Hmm.
more in just why is it not one of the movies that every person must see because it's that good? Because I would put it at that level. I think it is a truly great movie with a great cast, a great story, and for some reason, and I know this isn't a review of LA Confidential, although
Sure.
we may need to do that in the future. Um, as I'm thinking back now, I don't think it has had the steam that it deserves.
No, I think that's fair. I mean, I think that we're absolutely in our right to talk about it now, because I think that that's something that I want to touch on in these every best picture movies is, you know, the with the privilege and the beauty of hindsight, did the right film win? You know, and
Mhm.
if not, which one should have done? I remember also at the time, you know, we loved this movie. You know, as I said, we were a bunch of film
Yeah.
students, so we loved this film. And it's based on a James Elroy novel, and so,
Yes.
you know,
Yeah.
people would have been familiar with that. And I think it's just a tough, corrupt cop movie at the end of the day. You know,
Mhm.
it's about sort of LA. It's a noir detective story. I mean, Kim Basinger finally got her Oscar for it, and it introduced American audiences, I think, for the first time to Russell Crowe and Guy Pearce. You know, these
Yes.
two
Yes.
Aussies who had come over and
Yeah.
were playing these sort of two young cops at odds with one another.
Yeah.
Um, you know, one reason why people may not want to watch it these days is it's got Kevin Spacey in
Kevin
it.
Spacey. And I was going to
Um,
say is that I wouldn't say that's the reason. It's an interesting point to make, but I will
mm,
say that that film is the movie that turned me on to Kevin Spacey. And after that, I became the biggest Kevin Spacey fan. Like after that, he did like Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. And there was just a slew of films after that where I was like, Kevin Spacey, Kevin Spacey, Kevin Spacey. He's the greatest living actor today. I was on the fan club.
mm.
And boy, that didn't hold up over time.
No, I mean, well, yeah, he was kind of one of the hottest guys in Hollywood at the time. He had just won the Oscar for he'd had that great sort of breakout year where he won the Oscar for Usual
For
Suspects, and
for
and
American.
that was later.
Yeah,
That was
yeah.
late. That was like a year or two later. So he had just won Best Supporting Actor for Usual Suspects. That same year, he had played John Doe in Seven, and everyone was
Yeah.
like, "Oh wow, you know, he was like the go-to bad guy."
Mhm.
And so this was part of that sort of next phase of his career, where he was obviously being offered every great role in town. And I remember LA Confidential, although it's an ensemble and arguably Russell Crowe and Guy Pearce are the leads, if anybody is, it was sold around it being Kevin Spacey, Kim Basinger, and Danny DeVito. They
Yeah.
were like the big
Yes,
names in the
that's
movie.
right. That's right.
Um,
Danny DeVito is
he's like the reporter, isn't it, who runs the kind of
right.
gossip
Yeah,
rag.
yeah. Nobody knew Russell Crowe. Nobody knew Guy Pearce.
No,
But
no,
two
but
two
this
Aussies from down under.
absolutely, absolutely. And so and the other sort of great sort of artist involved in that was director Curtis Hanson, who
Mhm.
has since died as well. But he directed. I mean, he was already coming up. He had done like The Hand That Rocks the Cradle and The River Wild. Sort of decent '90s thrillers. Then he did this, and that kind of changed the corner. And he did Wonder Boys with Robert Downey Jr. and Michael Douglas, which is a great movie if you haven't seen it. And then he did 8 Mile, the Eminem movie that everybody
Mhm.
thought this is going to be terrible, and then it turned out to
Mhm.
actually be really, really good. Among other things. And so there are a number of reasons why LA Confidential is still important, but I
Mhm.
agree. I mean, I remember at the time it didn't make any money at all. It was a
No,
box
no.
office flop at the time. But then, Titanic was out and everybody was watching
Yeah. It's
Titanic.
going
It
to
was on every
Titanic.
screen.
Yeah.
So I think LA Confidential will be okay. It'll be a film that
Mhm.
will be rediscovered,
Mhm.
you know, by
Yeah.
future generations of noir loving film students, and
Mhm.
whomever. And it's a great movie. If you haven't seen it, do watch it. But
It is.
if it had won Best Picture, I think you'd go back now and you'd be like, yeah, it's all right. Yeah.
That's it. If it had won and Titanic had lost, we'd be looking back now thinking,
Mm,
which movie has really maintained a aura for a number of years? Because there are big films like Titanic that do lose their shine over the years.
absolutely, absolutely. And I'm sure we will get to plenty of those.
Well, that's going to wrap it up for this episode. You got James and I's thoughts on Titanic, but what are yours? Does it really stand the test of time? Did it deserve Best Picture? What are some of your thoughts 25 years on from this Titanic of a film that has proven to be unsinkable? James, what do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah. Have you been to see the new 4K remaster of it?
Mhm.
Personally, I think it looks pretty spectacular. Where does it stand in your household? Is it, a perennial date night favorite? It is
Yeah,
long, but or is it something that you deride for its sort of admittedly sort of, cheesy, simplistic characterizations and dialogue and what have you? We want to hear from you.
that's it. I was thinking of Jack and Kate, Rose when she's trying to when you said cheesy and he's like, I trust you. And every time he's like, go ahead, I trust her. I think, what does trust got to do with hitting this handcuffs with an axe? Trust has nothing
she
to do with
closes her
this.
eyes and swings that
Yes,
axe and gets it first time. And I'm like, nope, that would have either gone straight through his arm or in his head.
would have been much closer to the truth. But what do you think? Until next episode, bye-bye.
You ought to be in pictures. You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be.